Where did we leave off? 37-ish, somewhere in there. Sound about right?
Yes.
Earl,
Verse 12.
we had to clean up on aisle 6. Earl,
Or pilot. Or pilot.
Pilot, oh yeah.
driver 71, your shower's ready, driver.
It's like the guy that always wanted to have a microphone, so he gets a job at Pilot just so he can tell drivers their shower's ready. I just chose a different path. I decided to teach the Bible instead. I just always wanted to have a microphone. So. We last week began looking at the life of Joseph, and you guys have followed along with me. In many ways, Joseph coming from this massively dysfunctional family, Jacob and sons, as it were. Yet, what we're going to learn of Joseph is admirable. He keeps the faith. He lives the holy life despite the way his brothers treat him, despite the way his father was in fact Jacob and Israel, and Jacob and Israel. And right now in the story where we are, he's a young man, somewhere around 17 years old when he's taken captive by his brothers. And he's a little naive in the ways of communication. He gets these dreams, and this is what we covered last week. He gets these dreams where, the 11 sheaves bow down to him, and then the sun and the moon and the stars all bow down to him. And as soon as he has those dreams, he's quick to rise up and tell his brothers and his mother or his father, yeah, I've had these dreams. So, and they're like, we're not going to bow down to you. You're the runt of the family. I mean, besides Benjamin, you're like, no, we're not going to go that direction. And they end up hating him for it. They end up, I don't want to say jealous of him, but they just end up hating him for it. He's favored by Jacob. Jacob gave him this coat of many colors, and I won't go through all the colors again, but Laura Lee and Michelle would be happy to perform that for you after service if you just ask.
Well, you don't even have to ask.
You don't even have to say just, okay. Laura Lee and Michelle will be performing it after church. Never mind. But favored by Jacob, hated by his brothers. That's kind of where we left the story. Verse 12 of Genesis chapter 37 says, then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. So they're still caring for Jacob's sheep. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, here I am. So you need to consider and remember part of the story. They've taken the flock now back to Shechem. Shechem is where Simeon and Levi decided to murder those that were recovering from their circumcision surgeries. You recall that story? That was where this happened, Shechem. And so now they're taking the flock back there. Remember, God protected them leaving there so that the people around the area wouldn't attack Jacob and family. So perhaps Jacob, knowing that his sons have their flock in Shechem once again, perhaps Jacob's a little worried, and understandably so. Go check on my sons, Joseph. Go see how things are going. Make sure they're safe. And I love Joseph's heart here. How does he answer? He says, here I am. I'm available. I'm willing. Whatever you would have me do, Dad, I'm willing to go. That's the right response in obedience. That's how we are to respond in obedience as well. Here I am. Like Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 6. God asks, who shall go for us? Whom shall I send? And Isaiah says, here am I, send me. A willing heart is what God is looking for. Just like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Nevertheless, not my will, Father, but yours be done. Here I am is the answer. Joseph gives the answer. Here I am, willing to obey his father, like Isaiah, like Jesus. So, Dad says, then he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring word back to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Little did he know, as he was sending him out, he wouldn't see his son again for another 20 plus years. Life can change in a moment's notice. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? We're not told who this guy is in verse 15. I kind of wonder if it was an angel just popping in to help Joseph on the right path, because he knows who Joseph's brothers are. He knows where they are at. He shows up at the right time. So at the minimum, if it's not an angel, it certainly is divine orchestration that Joseph would meet the guy who knows where he needs to go. We can see that God is directing Joseph to his brothers in this moment. So he said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they're feeding their flocks. And the man said, well, they've departed from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. The name Dothan means two cisterns. We're going to learn most likely that one of the cisterns is empty. That's the pit that Joseph will end up in. At least we seem to think so. So Dothan means two cisterns. Verse 18. Now, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Just the brothers you want to have, right? That's not outside the realm of thinking for this family. I mean, Simeon and Levi had already committed murder. So here comes that guy. Here comes our brother. You know what? Got an idea. Let's kill him. They said to one another, look, the dreamer is coming. So they nicknamed him the dreamer. That's an animosity term there. That's not out of love that they're calling him the dreamer. Oh, he's always got these great ideas. He's such a visionary. That's not what they're saying here. They so despised the dreams that they now identified him by them. You've been identified by who you are, by something that you hold near and dear to your heart. Here comes the Bible thumper, right? Here comes the preacher. Man, I get that all the time at work. Who's the preacher? What's he got to say? It's like, that's the idea here, is there's this animosity. Verse 20, come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast devoured him. Isn't that the truth? They are wild beasts with this plan. We shall see what will become of his dreams. So if we kill him, those dreams can't come true, can they? But Reuben heard it and delivered him out of their hands and said, let's not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into the pit which is in the wilderness. Don't lay a hand on him. And Reuben's thinking that he might deliver them out of their hands and bring them back to his father. Reuben, in this plan, in this moment, has an ounce of conviction here. Well done, sandwich boy. He's got this, hold on a second here. Maybe we shouldn't kill him. Perhaps Reuben was feeling guilty for, having a relationship with Bilhah, his, Jacob's wife. And he knows how Jacob feels about him, and maybe he can do some redemption work here. Maybe he can offer something. Maybe he feels guilty about what he had done to Jacob, so he actually considers what this plan to kill Joseph might do to Dad. If we kill Joseph, that's really going to put Dad over the edge. He's his favorite, So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers, I think of Donny Osmond walking up, strutting from the movie, right? They stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. So the first thing they do, they grab him by the coat that Dad had given him, the coat that showed the favoritism that they were jealous of, and they rip it off him. You're just like us now. Your enemies are going to want to rip off the favor God has on your life as well. Your enemies want to rip off the favor your Father has placed on you as well. We have the blessings of God. We have the things that the blessings that God has showered upon us. And the world wants to ridicule us for those things, wants to strip us of those things, wants to lower us down. We need to defend against that. Then they took him and cast him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it, so that would seem to indicate it was a cistern, and one of the cisterns was empty, it seems. And they sat down to eat a meal. Okay. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. They sat down to eat a meal. Hey guys, let's beat our brother bloody. Let's throw him in a pit and have a picnic. We learned from chapter 42 that they didn't leave the scene to eat. Chapter 42 would tell them, didn't we hear the cries of our brother Jacob? Or our brother Joseph, rather. So it's just, how warped are these guys? I like what Barnhouse said about this scene as you think about them. Hey, pass the chicken salad, you know. Shut up, Joseph! You know, Barnhouse says, a physicist could compute the exact time required for his cries to go the 25 yards to the eardrums of the brothers. But it took 22 years for that cry to go from the eardrums to their hearts. And it was 22 years later that they would recognize that they had made this awful mistake. So Judah said to his brothers, well, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Why murder him when we could sell him and make a little money on the side? So let's sell him instead of murder him. But we need to remember, as we read this preposterous plan, God is working out all the details. God can use sin sinlessly. I've said it several times, and we're going to see it here again, where God is orchestrating or allowing these things to take place, let me say it that way, so that his plan is being worked out. Joseph is going to go down to Egypt to make provision for Jacob and his family. This is all part of God's unveiling of his plan. So they say, let's sell him. So verse 27, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh, so we hate him. And his brothers listen. So Judah comes up with this idea to sell him. Verse 28, the Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit. Hey guys, come over. And sold him to the Ishmaelites. Imagine the bartering process if Joseph is standing there. I mean, his eyes bleeding, his lips fat, you know, from being beaten up. And what will you give us for him? He's strong. He's pure. You know, look at his teeth. You know, come on. Well, okay, one's crooked now. But, you know, other than that, we're asking 100 pieces of silver. 100 pieces of silver? You're crazy. I wouldn't give you 100 pieces of silver for that guy. Look at him. 10 pieces of silver. What? You're out of your mind. There's no way he's only worth 10 pieces of silver. I'll give you 20 pieces of silver and a camel. We don't need a camel. Yeah, just, okay, 20 pieces of silver, right? You know. And they sell him. Then verse 29 is interesting. Verse 20. The Midianite traders passed by, and Joseph pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. So long, Joseph. Verse 29, then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. I don't know what happened to Reuben. Maybe he was busy cleaning up the picnic. Maybe he had to go into town for some business, we don't know, but it appears as though all of this transpired without Reuben being present, and he's headed back to rescue Joseph out of the pit, and he's not there. He rips his clothes, a sign of anguish, a sign of mourning. And he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go? So they took Joseph's tunic, and they killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether it's your son's or not? Where's the concern for Dad in this moment? Where's the tact? These guys are just, This shows that Jacob's sons not only had hatred toward the favored one, but they also had hatred toward the one who showed favor. These guys weren't real happy with Dad either. They don't give you any sort of tact here. Oh, is this Joseph's coat? Dad, we might have found something. You better sit down for this. Let me put my arm around you. You know, there's none of that. And he recognized it. He said, it's my son's tunic, a wild beast. He draws his own conclusion. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth on his waist, that's not comfortable, and mourned for his son many days, a sign of mourning to wear sackcloth. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. They didn't evidently expect it to be this bad, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Jacob had lost Rachel. Jacob had lost Rachel, his favorite wife. Now he's lost Joseph, his favorite son. He's not interested in being comforted. He wants to wallow in his depression, in his sorrow. He's like, just leave me alone. Gusick said this about this little section, and I thought it was an interesting insight. He says, him not drawing his own conclusion, not wanting to be comforted, believing a certain thing to be so. He says this also is a powerful illustration of the principle that if we believe something to be so, it may as well be. Joseph was not dead, but as long as Jacob believed he was, as far as Jacob was concerned, Joseph was dead. In the same way, the Christian has, in truth, been set free from sin. But if Satan can persuade us we are under the tyranny of sin, we may as well be. We need to remember the promises that we stand on are stronger than the feelings we have about the circumstance. Verse 36. Now the Midianites had sold him into Egypt, or sold him in Egypt to Potiphar. So he gets down to Egypt, he goes up on the selling block, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, buys him. So Potiphar is a man of status. He is in the government. He is the captain of the guard, it tells us. Most likely that means he's in charge of the security of Pharaoh's house. And not just that, he's in charge of all the executions of the land as well. So he's a powerful man in Egypt. And so that's where we leave Joseph, and then we head into Genesis chapter 38, and we get this scene change where they close the curtains for a minute and then reopen them on Jacob's family, and when we leave Joseph and we change to Judah. And I think it's important here to have this oddball chapter, not odd in a weird way, but it's kind of a weird story, but just that it doesn't seem to fit the line of Joseph here. All of a sudden we're looking at Judah and his life in chapter 38. Why is it here that these things take place? And I think by the divine inspiring of God, God placed it here so that we would have a comparative. Because we're going to see what Judah does in this chapter, and it's deplorable. And then we'll have a comparison to who Joseph has become as we get to chapter 39. Everybody tracking with me? Okay. So chapter 38, verse 1. It says, "It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hirah." Perhaps wanting to get away from dad. Perhaps, I've had enough of dad's crying. It's time for me to go now. I need to get out of here. And so we're not really given a reason, but he goes and visits his friend, this Adulamite. Verse 2, "And Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went into her." So this is not the first time we've seen the sons of Jacob marrying Canaanite women. We saw Esau marrying Canaanite women as well. That wasn't necessarily the intended plan of God, but nonetheless, here it is. This is not necessarily a good situation. He marries the daughter of Shua. Verse 3 tells us, "So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Notice one thing I do want us to note. She conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Judah names the firstborn. His wife is going to name the other two that are born. I'll give you the meanings of the names, though I, at this point, don't know of any strong significance. The name means watcher. And the name means watcher. Verse 4 says she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Notice it says she called his name Onan. She names it this time. Canaanite naming the sons. You can, if nothing else, but perhaps you can see Judah being drawn away from the one true God and toward the Canaanite gods, because now he's allowing his sons to be named under her belief system. The name Onan means strong. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Evidently it was a boy's name at one point, and he was at Chezib when he was born. Shelah means request. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. And Tamar, perhaps if you're familiar with Scripture, is a name you're familiar with, and one we're going to latch onto as the story unfolds here. But now we see Judah took a Canaanite wife, and now Er's grown up to the point that he's old enough to have a wife, and Judah finds for his son a Canaanite wife. And so he does the same thing for his son. Obviously, as we're reading chapter 38, time elapses because was just born like 3 verses ago, and now he's getting married. So some time has elapsed. All these things are occurring while we remember Joseph is enslaved in Egypt, and he's growing in the house of Potiphar, and he's going to jail, and he's 22 years down there. While those things are happening in Egypt, these things are unfolding in Canaan. Verse 7, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Canaanite ways were wicked in the sight of God. It was a culture full of idol worship. It was a culture full of false gods. And we're not told of the specifics of what happened to but he dies. But it says at the hand of the Lord. Idolatry is enough to kill a man. We need to understand that. And we're all guilty of idolatry in one form or another. We stand before God condemned. Yet, by His grace, by His mercy, we can be forgiven. In this case, dies in his sin. And so Judah said to Onan, the secondborn, go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir for your brother. And so this is an interesting concept and one that was established, notice, before the Levitical law. It's called the Levirate marriage, and it's later codified in Deuteronomy chapter 25, where it's made the law, but the principle stood before the Mosaic law was made. And here is the principle, or here is the law. If a man died before providing sons to his wife, it was the duty of his brothers to marry her and to give her sons. Do you remember the conversation that Jesus had with the Sadducees? And where he says, they come to him and they say, there were these 7 brothers, and the first brother married a woman, and he died before giving her sons, and then the second, and the third, and the 7th, so like him. And then, so whose bride will she be in the resurrection? And Jesus uses that to say, you don't understand about marriage and the resurrection and all that kind of stuff, and he sets them straight on that. But that's the principle we're reading about here, that if a man died without having sons to give to his wife, then it was the duty, the responsibility of the next brother to be the kinsman redeemer, to be the one that would marry this woman to produce offspring. And the child that was produced between the younger son, or the next son, and this woman would be the son of the dead brother. Tracking with me? And that way the inheritance could continue to pass. That way the lineage would continue. The lineage is what's important here. And so the child was considered the son of the brother who died. Okay, so verse 9. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and so it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And so Onan is not participating in what God has established as the plan here. Onan's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give my brother an heir. And so he uses his brother's wife for his own gratification. The language of verse 9 would say that this wasn't just one time, that there was, it would say whenever he went into his brother's wife, whenever they had relations. So it was just a purely for sexual gratification that he does this. He doesn't honor the statute established and the request of his father. Right? It was Judah that said, please do this. And Onan says, no. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, whether it was the Lord's statute. Therefore he killed him also. So that's 2 sons of Judah's now gone. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, lest he die like his brothers, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in his father's house. So Judah goes to Tamar and goes, When we met, I had 3 sons, and now I've got 1. Your track record with my sons is not so hot. I tell you what, Sheila's a little young to get married right now. Why don't you head on home? You be the widow, go back to your father's house, and when Sheila comes of age, then we'll talk about marriage. That's what he said. That's not what he intended at all. It says there, lest he also die like his brothers. He's like, I'm not going to give her Sheila. It was never Judah's intent to give her to Sheila. So now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah. He and his friend Hira the Adulamite. So his wife dies now. He's lost 2 sons and a wife. He goes through this time of mourning, and it comes to the next season, and it's sheep shearing season. And I don't know about you, but I look forward to sheep shearing season every year. I mean, that's marked on my calendar. It's one of the few things I actually put on there. I love sheep shearing season. Does anybody know when sheep shearing season is? I suppose you could probably figure out, probably the spring. But sheep shearing season to this Agrarian culture, it was a holiday. It was a time of celebration. They would bring all the flocks together, and they'd sharpen their shears, and they'd shear all the sheep, and it was a time of celebration. Why? Because they're making money. Right? You shear the sheep so that you can have the wool to make the yarn, to make the clothing. And so this is where money exchanged. And as money was coming in, they're selling their wool. It was a time of celebration. Hey, pass another bottle. It's a great time. Let's celebrate. And so that's what's happening. And it was told Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear the sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Sheila was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. So Judah had not honored his word, though time had passed and Sheila was now of age. And it's interesting, the way this all unfolds, it seems as though Tamar actually wants to honor the law, wants to honor the statute, to say, I need to be with Sheila. That's the way things are supposed to unfold. But the way that she goes about it is just off. If you know the story, you know what's coming. But if you don't, it's just off. So she dresses as a prostitute and sits on the way of the road and waits for Judah to come by. And when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot. So evidently she did this rather well, because she had covered her face. So understand that the worship of Canaanite gods was based around fertility. And they worshiped these gods, and the way that they worshiped these gods was they would hire temple prostitutes who kept their faces veiled, because it wasn't meant to be an act of intimacy between a guy and a girl. This was an act of worship unto their little g god. And so it wasn't so much about the woman, it was about the act, if that makes sense. And so they would veil their faces. It was a duty unto their God. And so Judah obviously had married a Canaanite wife. He's familiar with the Canaanite ways, and now he's participating in the Canaanite practices. So he says, then he turned to her by the way and said, please let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, well, what will you give me that you may come into me? What price are we going to negotiate here? And he said, I'll send you a young goat from the flock. You look like a one goat kind of girl, I guess. And so she said, well, will you give me a pledge until you send it? She's thinking in this moment, Judah says, yeah, I'll give you a goat. They're at the flock. As soon as we're done, I'll send it over. And she's thinking, yeah, that's what you said about your son. As soon as Sheila's of age, I'll send him over. But that didn't really happen, and so I'm not going to trust your word here, Judah, that you're going to send a flock when we're done, or a goat from the flock when you're done. Why would I believe you to send this goat? So she asked, what will you pledge? And then he said, what pledge shall I give you? So she said, your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand. Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So what will you give me? What's the pledge that you're going to give me till you send this goat? And he's like, well, I've got my signet, I've got my cord, Signet wasn't a ring necessarily, it was something that you would wear around your neck, so the signet was probably on the cord. It was the stamp that you would use to sign your name. And the staff, and those things are very unique to Judah. Obviously, the stamp would say, Judah, the son of Jacob, or whatever, you know. And the staff was something that a shepherd would have the whole of their lives. And so they would know what shepherd is across the field by the staff that they would have. And so they were very identifiable, that these would not be mistaken as Judah's. She becomes pregnant. She conceives by him. And so she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. She went back to life. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite. Evidently he, took the time to do the deed, but wasn't going to take the time to pay. Hey, Adullamite, hey, Shua, go take care of this. By his friend the Adullamite to receive his pledge from a woman's hand, but he did not find her. So he's willing to send the goat to a prostitute, but not willing to send his son to his daughter-in-law. That's where Judah's at in life right now. I'm willing to pay the prostitute, but I'm not willing to honor my commitment to my daughter-in-law. A real winner in the moment. So the Adullamite's looking for this prostitute. It says in verse 21, then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside? And said, there's no harlot here in this place. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also the men of the place said, there is no harlot in this place. And then Judah said, okay, let her take them for herself, lest we be ashamed. For I sent this young goat, and I have not found her. He's not ashamed of the act. He's ashamed that he can't make payment on the act. Just let her keep it, okay? What's the point in drumming this up? So he's hoping that bygones will be bygones, and if he can just bury this, that would be the best thing. That's not what's going to happen. Verse 24. And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So as a widow, she was still under the banner of Judah, still under the care of Judah. And if she were to go out and get pregnant by somebody else, that would be, in essence, committing adultery, even though Judah wasn't keeping his word. And so they evidently is showing at this point. 3 months later, she probably is showing off her showing a little bit because she wants word to get back to Judah. It does, in fact, get back. Judah, perhaps in this moment, is relieved. Oh wow, Tamar's pregnant by somebody else. That means I don't lose Sheila. I don't have to give my son to her anymore. It really is kind of pathetic. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. So she's being dragged out of the tent, and as she is, she said, hold on, let me get a couple things. And Judah's going to be the one to pass judgment on her because she is under his banner. And so, well, let me grab these things. And she says to Judah, it's by the man that owned these things that I'm pregnant. Busted, Judah. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she's been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Sheila, my son. And he never knew her again. So Judah admits fault here, but never makes it right. He's sorry that he got busted, but he's not repentant. It seems he'll have nothing to do with the boys. It says that he never knew her again, and of course that would mean sexually, but it does seem more than that, that he's not involved. Tamar's going to have twins here, and it seems as though Judah's not going to do anything about it. He's just relieved that he didn't have to give her to Sheila. So verse 27. Now it came to pass, at the time for giving birth, that behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore, his name was called Perez. Perez means breach. And what a strange scene, you know. Tamar's giving birth, and the first thing to come out, and if you had kids, you kind of know how it's supposed to work. The first thing that comes out is an arm. Okay, well that's worse than breach, probably. This is just a straight, and so she's like, well, if he's coming, this would be the firstborn. The midwife ties this thread around his wrist, and then he's like, bye, and goes back in, I guess. I don't know. And it's just like, what's going on in this womb here? Who's the younger? Who's the older? Does sticking out a hand mean you're the firstborn, or does it have to be a foot and a hand? Does it have to be a head? I mean, who would be the firstborn in this situation? We don't really, I don't know. The first, anyway, the first that comes all the way out is Perez, breach. It's like, well, you weren't necessarily the first one partially out anyway. Sorry, it's just weird for me to think about. It's just like, what? So Perez, breach, and then they're going to name the brothers Zerah. Zerah means rising. It says, verse 30, afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So these twins are born. Strange story, and really sad in many ways, that the family that God had chosen to be his does so many things to dishonor him. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and now Judah have all done these deplorable acts. And it's really kind of sad that this is the family that God has chosen, and yet they've done so many things to dishonor him. But God is long-suffering. And God continues to work with this family. Yet God is gracious. And I don't know about you, but I take heart from that, because I know my failings, and I know the times that I've fallen short, and I know the times that I've lived deplorably. And yet God is gracious, and God is kind, and God is long-suffering with me in my life. I take heart in this story, though it's evil, that there is a God who continues to work with those that dishonor him. And in the midst of this mess, God is working. This is wild to think about. Tamar, the Canaanite, and Judah, the Israelite, produce an offspring named Perez. Perez is listed in both genealogies of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3, Perez is listed as Jesus being the descendant of this man that is born of this awful situation. In the midst of the mess, God is still working. We can take hope in that. Amen?
Amen.
Okay, we'll continue on. We've got a little bit more. Scene change, verse chapter 39, back to Egypt, right? Lights change, scene, backdrop changes. We're now focusing back on Joseph. And remember, I think this chapter 38 was there so that we have a comparative to say, look at the life of Judah, look at the way that he's living, marrying Canaanite women, having children through his daughter-in-law, and then compare that to the way Joseph lives. Chapter 39, verse 1. We're not going to cover the whole thing, just a few verses. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. The Lord was with Joseph. Where does success come from? We need to recognize it in our lives as well. If God has taken care of us, if God has blessed us, be it through our vocations, our jobs, just through whatever circumstance, our success comes from God. Joseph recognizes that. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. What we don't see in Joseph here is a mad, disturbed, vengeance-seeking, self-consumed, I'm going to kill him, man. We don't see that in Joseph at all. Despite the circumstances that have been placed upon his life, despite how difficult everything has been, he was beaten by his brothers, thrown into a well, pulled out of the well, sold to Ishmaelites, dragged behind a camel, put up on a block, and sold to Potiphar. Despite all of that happening, what we don't see in Joseph is any idea of hatred, any self-pity, any vengeance-seeking. That's not present in Joseph. Rather, In his devotion to God, he's seeking to better the situation that he's in. He's seeking to make life better for those around him. He's serving Potiphar as though he were serving God, right? Colossians chapter 3. Serving Potiphar as though he was serving God. God honors that, and he blesses everything Joseph does. Things are going well for Joseph, and ultimately things are going well for Potiphar. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord had made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Potiphar recognizes that the Lord is in this. He's like, Potiphar goes down to the bar. He's like, let me tell you about this servant I bought, Joseph, man. He's like, everything he touches is a blessing. I mean, my flocks are growing, my farm is growing, my household is growing, everything's going. He keeps talking about this Jehovah God thing. I don't know what that's all about, but evidently his God is blessing him because, and he gets to the point, look at, it'll say it here in a second. So verse 4, so Joseph found favor in his sight, and he served him. Then he made him an overseer of his house, and all that he put under his authority. So it was, from the time that he made him an overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for the sake of Joseph. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and the field. Potiphar's like, this is fantastic. And God is making a way for Joseph and making a way for Jacob and his sons ultimately. There are many trials that are going to come for Joseph. But through this, we can see the hand of the Lord at work, right? You guys can see that God is taking care of him and divinely orchestrating Joseph's life, just as he does mine and yours as well. Look at verse 6. Thus he, Potiphar, left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he did not know what he had, except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Things were going so well for Potiphar that he was hanging out at the bar every night, every weekend. He was hanging out with his friends, and he's like, I don't have to do anything at home. Joseph's got it all. I don't even know how much I have. What's for dinner? That's his concern for the day. He's got this massive empire building, this wealth building, and he's like, all I need to worry about is what's for dinner tonight. That's how much he trusted Joseph. And it says there at the end of verse 6 that he was handsome in form and appearance. So Joseph was a good-looking guy. He got his good looks from Rachel, his mom, right? Rachel was a beautiful woman, it tells us. He got his good looks, and not only that, he was in form and appearance, so he was chiseled as well. This is the guy that every girl dreams about. This is the guy that the ladies talk about at the salon. This is the Joseph's. Have you seen Joseph? It came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. So not only do all the ladies in the court notice Joseph, so does Potiphar's wife. And she said to him, lie with me. Not uncommon in the Egyptian culture. The truth of the matter is it's not uncommon in any culture anymore, is it? Lie with me. It doesn't matter what the paper says. It doesn't matter what our marriage agreement is. If I want that, I'm going to take it. And that's where Potiphar's wife is in this moment. One of the words used describing Potiphar may have indicated, I don't know that I'm buying it, that he was possibly a eunuch and unable to satisfy his wife because of that. And so she had free will to do whatever she wanted. I don't know. I can't draw that conclusion fully on myself, but it was one of the things suggested. But that doesn't make it right. It certainly doesn't make it the way God would want it to be. And so she looks at Joseph and goes, yeah, I want the pool boy, and in that moment. But he refused. He said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in this house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. Potiphar doesn't even check on me anymore. There's no one greater in this house than I. He's saying this to Potiphar's wife. Nor has he kept back anything from me but you. Evidently there was an understanding and agreement. Potiphar's like, you can have whatever you want in this house, just don't touch my wife. Because you are his wife. And look what Joseph says. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Joseph's heart in this moment is to honor God in this. He understands the sanctity of marriage given by God in the Garden of Eden. You guys know there's this attack on marriage in this day and age, and the definition of marriage and amongst our government. I'm sorry, government cannot define what marriage is. Government cannot determine what a marriage is. They don't have that right. Marriage, the covenant of marriage was given long before any law was given. It was given in the Garden of Eden. It was defined by God, and it is unchangeable. One man, one woman. The end. And Joseph's heart is to honor God in this. And he understands that sanctity of marriage. And so he wants to uphold it. And he says, I can't do this great wickedness, and I can't sin against God. Remember, the law wasn't established, but this covenant was. So, as it was, she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. This was not a one-time interaction. Every time Joseph woke up, there was Potiphar's wife. Hey, lie with me today. Hey, lie with me today. Like Groundhog Day. Hey, lie with me today. The temptation was constant. The temptation was persistent. And maybe we can learn something from this. Our temptation will be constant. Our temptations will be persistent. They are not yielding. But Joseph remains true to his conviction to honor God. And from that, I think we can learn a lot. I'll close with some things to consider about Joseph. And this was written by David Guzik, and I liked it so much I wanted to share it. He says, even in the midst of this situation, God did not depart from Joseph. In some ways, the story is going to get worse, and when it does, God will still be with Joseph. God is working out not only for Joseph himself, but also for the larger purpose of God's redemptive plan. We can thank God for his great plan. Consider this. He says, if Joseph's brothers never sell him to the Midianites, then Joseph never goes to Egypt. And if Joseph never goes to Egypt, he's never sold to Potiphar. And if he's never sold to Potiphar, Potiphar's wife never falsely accuses him of rape. That's what's coming next. If Potiphar's wife never falsely accuses him of rape, then he's never put in prison. And if he's never put in prison, he never meets the baker and the butler of Pharaoh. And if he never meets the baker and butler of Pharaoh, he never interprets their dreams. And if he never interprets their dreams, he never gets to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And if he never interprets Pharaoh's dreams, he never gets to be made prime minister. And if he's never made prime minister, he never wisely administrates for the severe famine coming upon the region. And if he never wisely administrates for the severe famine coming upon the region, then his family back in Canaan perishes from the famine. And if his family back in Canaan perishes from the famine, the Messiah can't come forth from a dead family. And if Messiah can't come forth, then Jesus never came. And if Jesus never came, you're dead in your sin. So despite the circumstances, despite how difficult things look in this moment for Joseph and the temptation that he is trying to endure, all of this is being divinely orchestrated so that you and I can sit here thousands of years later worshiping a God who loves us and redeems us. Amen? Amen. Let's stand and let's close in prayer. Father God, I thank you for your divine orchestration, and yet your ways are so much higher than ours. And that you tell us to not lean on our own understanding, but to trust you with all of our heart. Father, we look at a circumstance and we can only see from our perspective, yet you see from above all things. And you know how you're working all things together for our good. So, whether we be in that moment where things are really, really hard right now, or whether we're at a moment of respite where we have a breath, an opportunity to catch our breath, Lord. We know that trials come into our lives, and that you don't waste trials, and you don't waste those things, Father, but you're rather using them for our good and for your glory. Help us to maintain that perspective. When we're looking up from the bottom of a cistern, when we're being sold on the slavery block, when we are being beaten by our brothers and our friends. May we keep our eyes fixed on you, the author and perfecter of our faith. Jesus, for the joy set before you, you endured the cross. We can endure as well. Give us strength to do so. We keep our eyes fixed on you because we love you. I pray that with our lives we would show it. In Jesus' name, amen. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice things I want to continue to offer and make sure you understand is available is if anybody needs prayer. We would love to pray for you after service. We come together as a family to lay hands on you for whatever reason. So seek that out. Just come see me, and that's something we offer week after week. Okay, that's always available. I love you guys. Have a good weekend.